Om Vishnupad Paramhansa Paribrajakacharyasto Tarasata Shishimad A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai Anantakoti Vaishnavrinda Ki Jai Namacharya Srila Haridas Thakur Ki Jai Primsako Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhar Shivas Arigor Bhaktivinoda Ki Jai Shri Shri Radha Krishna Gopa Gopinatha Shyamakunda Radha Kunda Giri Govardhan Ki Jai Shri Vrindavan Dham Ki Jai Mayapur Dham Ki Jai Jagannath Puri Ki Jai Ganga Mai Ki Jai Jamuna Mai Ki Jai Tulsi Maharani Ki Jai Bhakti Devi Ki Jai Samaveda Bhakta Vrinda Ki Jai. All glories to the assembled devotees. All glories to the assembled devotees. All glories to the assembled devotees. All glories to Shri Shri Guru and Gauranga. All glories to Srila Prabhupada. Today we're continuing the reading of Volume 3 of Srila Prabhupada Lilamrita, written by His Holiness Satsvarup Das Goswami. Now this particular volume, it only deals with 1 year in Srila Prabhupada's life. And the original title of this volume is Only He Could Lead Them. And it deals with Srila Prabhupada in San Francisco, and then later when he returns to India to recover his health after having a stroke. So we're just finishing up the first chapter, how Srila Prabhupada is preaching to the hippies. And we'll continue now. Understanding that Lord Krishna considered anyone who approached him a virtuous person, and that even a little devotional service would never be lost and could save a person at the time of death, Srila Prabhupada had opened his door to everyone, even the most abject runaway. But for a lost soul to fully receive the balm of Krishna consciousness, he would first have to stay a while and chant, inquire, listen, and follow. So Srila Prabhupada, he had his daily schedule, and he was multitasking. First of all, he was trying to save the entire world by giving them Krishna consciousness. That was one task. Second of all, he was trying to present Krishna consciousness through books. So while we were all sleeping, Srila Prabhupada would be up all night translating Bhagavad Gita, Srimad Bhagavatam, Chaitanya Charitamrita, Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu. He was multitasking within the multitasking. He was translating several books at one time, because all of these books had to be translated. At the same time, his door was always open. And here he was in Haight-Ashbury, the center of hippiedom, and sometimes some very unusual people would come into Prabhupada's room to speak to him. So on all levels, Prabhupada, 24 hours a day, was giving himself to the world so that Krishna consciousness could be spread in every town and village. Prabhupada had some helpers. He had met quite a few people in New York. One of them was Allen Ginsberg, who was a famous hip poet at that time. And Allen Ginsberg, he assisted Prabhupada not only in New York, but then in San Francisco as well. So Allen Ginsberg, he met Prabhupada at the airport when he arrived in San Francisco. He introduced Prabhupada when they had the huge rock concert with 3,000 people attending. Here it says 5,000. A few weeks ago it said 3,000, so I guess must have increased in the last few weeks. And not only that, but Allen Ginsberg, even before he met Srila Prabhupada, he would have be-ins all over the country. And in these be-ins, because he had come to India, he had learned about the Hare Krishna Maha Mantra, And he had made the Hare Krishna Maha Mantra famous in his own way. He had one tune that he sang. He carried a little portable harmonium with him. And when Prabhupada did arrive on the scene, Allen Ginsberg was immediately attracted to him and tried to help him in every way possible. So as Allen Ginsberg had advised 5,000 hippies at the Avalon, that's where the rock concert was, the Avalon Ballroom, the early morning kirtan at the temple provided a vital community service for those who were coming down from LSD and wanted to stabilize their consciousness on LSD and all of the other hallucinogenic drugs that the hippies have been taking. Most of us now can get our PhD in drug addiction after all these classes. We've heard so much. And because many of these people were under the influence of hallucinogenic drugs, such as LSD, magic mushrooms, and all types of other things, Allen Ginsberg, he took pity on them because he understood when you take these drugs, it alters your consciousness and you see the world in a different way. And when the drug wears off, you come back into the material world, and it's sometimes a very rough landing. So Allen Ginsberg, at this ballroom concert, he advised all these thousands of hippies that if you're ever having a bad trip on LSD, that means you've taken this drug and it's very hard for you to re-enter into the material world because you've been off in some other space planet, just head for the Hare Krishna temple, because there, by chanting Hare Krishna, you'll be able to stabilize your consciousness on re-entry, as he calls it. Allen himself sometimes dropped by in the morning with acquaintances with whom he had stayed up all night. So he was speaking from experience. All these people at that time, their life was exactly the opposite of what's day for the spiritualists is night for the materialists. So we had given up intoxication, illicit sex, meat eating, gambling, whereas these young hippies, they would be up all night engaged in those activities. So somehow or other, Prabhupada was able to, as he said in the previous, they would first have to stay a while and chant, inquire, listen, and follow. So by Prabhupada's methodic process of giving kirtan and classes morning and evening, he was able to change the entire atmosphere there by introducing the Hare Krishna Maha Mantra and the teachings of the Vedas. And many, many people were benefited by this. In fact, Prabhupada saved the lives of many people simply by this simple process of giving up the 4 sinful activities, the Mahapaps, as Prabhupada would call them, and chanting Hare Krishna. Allen Ginsberg is speaking. At 6:30 in the morning, we went over to Swami Bhaktivedanta's space station. That's what he called the temple. For some chanting and a little Krishna consciousness. There were about 30 or 40 people there, all chanting Hare Krishna to this new tune they've made up just for mornings. Now, of course, Prabhupada, he was teaching us different tunes of the Hare Krishna Maha Mantra. And we have what's called the morning tune, and that's sung by the devotees at Mangalartik. Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna. It's a very mild tune. And according to Allen Ginsberg, the devotees had made it up. But Srila Prabhupada actually was training the devotees. He was teaching them how to play mridanga. The first mridanga had arrived from India. He was teaching them how to keep the beat with the kartals. He was having them play the harmonium. At this point, they hadn't yet learned how to keep in tune, so they were using the harmonium as a drone, just one or two different keys that they would play. So Allen Ginsberg, he appreciated very much what Prabhupada was doing for the youth. He knew that this is where it was most needed, and therefore, whenever he could, 6:30 in the morning after they had stayed up all night, he would come around with his friends and enjoy the chanting of Hare Krishna with Srila Prabhupada. One kid got a little freaked out by the scene at first, but then he relaxed. And afterwards, he told me, this is Allen Ginsberg speaking, "You know, at first I thought, what is this? But then suddenly I realized I was just not grooving with where I was. I wasn't being where I was." So this is hippie talk, hippie jargon. Be here now. That was one of the slogans. Be here now. That means be present. Don't worry about the past. Don't worry about the future. Just concentrate on where you are right now. So I've chosen this picture because Allen Ginsberg, because he was so-called famous as a poet, he would often be invited on television programs to speak at colleges, at invocations, and wherever he went, he would start his program with the Hare Krishna Maha Mantra. So here he was on a very famous television program being interviewed, and a perfectly straight American who'd never heard of Krishna, obviously wasn't a hippie. The first thing Allen Ginsberg did on the television program was got out his little harmonium and started to chant Hare Krishna to millions of people in America on television. So in that way, he assisted Prabhupada in spreading the glories of the Hare Krishna Maha Mantra, although he himself couldn't follow the four regulative principles. At least he was helping Prabhupada by chanting Hare Krishna. On occasion, the re-entries, re-entry means after the effects of taking LSD wears off, you have to re-enter the material world. On occasion, the re-entries would come flying in out of control for crash landings in the middle of the night. One morning at 2 a.m., the boys sleeping in the storefront were awakened by a pounding at the door, screaming, and police lights. When they opened the door, a hippie with wild red hair and beard plunged in, crying, "Oh, Krishna, Krishna, oh, help me. Oh, don't let them get me. Oh, for God's sake, help." A policeman stuck his head in the door and smiled. "We decided to bring him by here," he said, "because we thought maybe you guys could help him." So even these crazy hippies, drugged out, nowhere to sleep, nowhere to live, nowhere to bathe, didn't have money, didn't know where to get their food, the police would bring these crazy hippies to the Hare Krishna temple because they didn't know what to do with them. So as he said, "We thought maybe you guys could help him." So the boys screaming, "I'm not comfortable in this body," as the policeman shut the door. The boy began chanting furiously and turned white, sweating profusely in terror. This is what happens when you take a psychedelic drug and you're off in some other fantasy world. And then when the drug wears out and you come back into the real world with the filth and the anger and the wars and well, it's very frightening. So he was having a bad, what did they call it? What did they call it the last time? A bad re-entry into the material world from his fantasy world. Swamiji's boys spent the rest of the early morning consoling him and chanting with him until the Swami came down for kirtan and class. The devotees often sent distressed young people to Swamiji with their problems. Well, because the devotees, you have to remember, for instance, this Saturday coming up is the anniversary of the incorporation of ISKCON, when Prabhupada got the legal papers for making a religious society in America called the International Society for Krishna Consciousness. Although none of the young boys could figure out why it was international, they only had one little storefront at the time in New York, and they didn't think it was going to go beyond there. But Prabhupada had bigger plans. So all of the devotees were no more than 1 year old in Krishna consciousness. The first initiations were in September of 1966. So now it's 1967, just in the beginning of the year, less than 1 year, the first initiates. So when people like this crazy boy come along, they could help them to some point, but then after that, they would send them to Srila Prabhupada. And Srila Prabhupada would be up in his room, which was in the building next door on the second or third floor, and they would find their way to his door and come in, and Prabhupada would try to help these young people. And they allowed almost anyone to see Swamiji and take up his valuable time. While walking around San Francisco, Rabindra Swarup, he was one of the first initiates. Rabindra Swarup, he followed Prabhupada to San Francisco, once met a man who claimed to have seen people from Mars in his tent when he had been stationed in Vietnam. So that's another dimension going on, because in America at that time, all the young men were living in fear of being drafted into the army, because as soon as they were drafted, they would be sent to Vietnam, which was living hell. Vietnam, it was a useless war. About 50,000 young American men died in it for no purpose whatsoever. They lost the war anyway. It was the people, the country wanted to have a particular ideology, and the Americans came in and tried to stop them. So it was useless. So when these boys who did not die came back from Vietnam, they were traumatized from seeing so much death, and a lot of, in those days, a lot of the soldiers would take opium. They would take even stronger drugs there, and a lot of abuse. So they were in a very difficult mental state. So this particular veteran who had come back from Vietnam, he told Rabindra Swarup that when he was in Vietnam and living in a tent, the Martians came to visit him. The man, who had just been discharged from an army hospital, said that the Martians had talked to him. Rabindra Swarup told him about Swamiji's book, Easy Journey to Other Planets, which verified the idea of life on other planets, and he suggested that Swami could probably tell him more about the people from Mars. So the man visited the Swami up in his apartment. Yes, Swamiji answered, there are Martians. So when Srila Prabhupada was still in India in the 1950s, at that time, or the early 60s, at that time, there was a space war going on between America and Russia because they wanted to reach the moon, and they wanted to put their flag on the moon first and claim the moon to be an extension of their countries, right? So every day in the newspaper, you would hear about the space war and the Sputniks and the astronauts and who put their flag on first, and you would see pictures of men walking. They found Prabhupada didn't believe any of it. He told the devotees that this is just a hoax. They never went to the moon. And many years later, it was proven that they never went to the moon. They just, they had a place in Arizona, a desert in America, where they set up all of these things because they were spending millions and billions of dollars on this space race, and they had to show something. So they had movies of these astronauts landing on the moon, but they never went to the moon. They were in Arizona, in America. So yes, so at that time, because it was a big international topic, Prabhupada wrote and printed his first book called Easy Journey to Other Planets. And in that book, Prabhupada describes the material and the antimaterial particles, the material planets and the spiritual planets. He changed the nomenclature. He changed the names from Atma and things like that to something that the normal people could understand, according to scientific names. So Prabhupada in this book, in his first book, Easy Journey to Other Planets, he described, according to the Vedas, the different types of inhabitants of different planets. So Prabhupada confirmed to this poor veteran who had come back from Vietnam that yes, there are Martians. Gradually, Prabhupada's followers became more considerate of their spiritual master and began protecting him from persons they thought might be undesirable. One such undesirable was Rabbit. This is Rabbit. Perhaps the dirtiest hippie in Haight-Ashbury. Rabbit's hair was always disheveled, dirty, and even filled with lice. His clothes were ragged and filthy, and his dirt-caked body stank. Now, I don't know, this is just a picture I found. I don't know what Rabbit looked like because I never met Rabbit. But he seems to have all of the qualifications. He wanted to meet Prabhupada, but the devotees refused, not wanting to defile Prabhupada's room with Rabbit's nasty, stinking presence. One night after the lecture, however, Rabbit waited outside the temple door. As Prabhupada approached, Rabbit asked, "May I come up and see you?" Prabhupada agreed. I'd just like to make one note here that we've seen in previous weeks, of course you haven't seen these, but the devotees who are following the episodes of Prabhupada Lilamrita, we've seen the hundreds and hundreds of hippies on Hippie Hill. So there was nowhere for them to live. They would just live on Hippie Hill, nowhere to bathe. And I remember when we went there to Haight-Ashbury to meet the devotees, I was thinking, where do you bathe here? You know, how do people live? And finally, I just saw a lake, and I jumped into the lake with my clothes on, because there was no way to live a civilized life amongst the hippies. So they had all converged at this place, Haight-Ashbury and Hippie Hill, but there was no way to live a civilized life. And Prabhupada, those who came to the temple, Prabhupada was training them in cleanliness, in hygiene, in proper cooking. He had to train us just like little babies, because in the Western countries, they don't distinguish between their left hand and their right hand. And here everyone knows that left hand is meant for muchi and right hand is meant for suchi. In the Western countries, nobody knows about muchi and suchi. they eat with any hand, they do it. There's no differentiation. So Prabhupada really had to train us just like little babies. And people like Rabbit, I mean, a person that we just saw, like Rabbit, they became devotees. Actually, they were suffering very much. And they had come to Haight-Ashbury and to Hippie Hill to get some spiritual experience and knowledge. And it was Prabhupada right there who was giving that. So these people, although they were dirty, they had no spiritual education, when they met Prabhupada, and Prabhupada told them what they should do and what they shouldn't do, they listened to Prabhupada and they respected him, and it's people like this who gradually became devotees. As for challengers, almost every night someone would come to argue with Prabhupada. One man came regularly with prepared arguments from a philosophy book, from which he would read aloud. Prabhupada would defeat him, and the man would go home, prepare another argument, and come back again with his book. One night, after the man had presented his challenge, Prabhupada simply looked at him without bothering to reply. Prabhupada's neglect was another defeat for the man, who got up and left. So, I remember, have any of you heard of Chandramauli Swami? A few devotees, yes. So when we were used to distribute books, before Chandramauli became a devotee, he would come every day with arguments. And we would have to defeat him. And after a while, because we're distributing books, so we're trying to help people become Krishna conscious, and along comes pre-Chandramauli Swami with his argument for the day. And after a while, just as what Prabhupada did, you just look at them. Is it enough? Are you going to surrender? Are you going to read Bhagavad Gita? Otherwise, don't waste my time, right? So it comes to that point. So that point, when the devotee stops arguing and convincing, that person has to make a decision. Am I arguing just for the sake of arguing? Or do I really want to understand the philosophy properly? So that's when they make the step into Krishna consciousness and become devotees. This poor man got up and left. Another one. Israel, like Rabbit, was another well-known Haight-Ashbury character. He had a long ponytail and often played the trumpet during kirtan. You see, these crazy people would come for kirtan. They enjoyed kirtan because everyone has the Atma and the Paramatma in their hearts. After one of Prabhupada's evening lectures, Israel challenged, "This chanting may be nice, but what will it do for the world? What will it do for humanity?" Prabhupada replied, "Are you not in the world? If you like it, why will others not like it? So you chant loudly." Prabhupada had a way of, he would not crush the person, but he would defeat them very politely. A mustached man standing at the back of the room asked, "Are you Allen Ginsberg's guru?" Many of the devotees knew that the question was loaded, and that to answer either yes or no would be difficult. First of all, Allen Ginsberg, he appreciated Srila Prabhupada. He assisted Srila Prabhupada in many ways, but he was not prepared to follow Srila Prabhupada by accepting the four regulative principles. And guru and disciple means when the disciple accepts the discipline of the guru. So you might see an elevated person as your friend or appreciate him, but until you surrender to that person, you're not a disciple. So there was no question of Prabhupada being Allen Ginsberg's guru, because he never accepted the discipline of the four regulative principles. Srila Prabhupada replied, "I am nobody's guru. I am everybody's servant." To the devotees, the whole exchange became transcendental due to Swamiji's reply. Swamiji had not simply given a clever response. He had answered out of a deep, natural humility. So this is actually the way Srila Prabhupada, he wasn't just trying to defeat this person or avoid giving an answer. Prabhupada considered himself the servant of each one of these people because he was trying to help them. He wasn't trying to command them. He wanted to uplift them. And at one point Prabhupada said it takes pounds of blood to make just one devotee. Prabhupada would have to work so hard and extend himself so much to convince people to become devotees. So yes, he considered himself to be a servant of all of these people he was trying to help, not a guru. One morning, a couple attended the lecture. A woman carrying a child and a man wearing a backpack. During the question and answer period, the man asked, "What about my mind?" Prabhupada gave him philosophical replies, but the man kept repeating, "What about my mind? What about my mind?" With a pleading, compassionate look, Prabhupada said, "I have no other medicine. Please chant this Hare Krishna. I have no other explanation." I have no other answer, but the man kept talking about his mind. Finally, one of the women devotees interrupted and said, "Just do what he says, just try it." And Prabhupada picked up his kartals and began kirtan. So that's why this Hare Krishna Mahamantra, we know that the Sanskrit word for mind is man. And the Sanskrit word for delivery is tra. So mantra, the Maha Mantra, the great chance for deliverance. Because as Krishna explains in the Bhagavad Gita, your mind can either be your best friend or your worst enemy. So therefore we have to control our mind. And the easiest way in this age of Kali, because we all are alpamedasa, that means reduced intelligence, the easiest and recommended process is to chant the Hare Krishna Maha Mantra, which will naturally bring the mind under control so that then you can act in Krishna's service. The mind controls the senses. So when the mind is controlled, then the senses can work in Krishna's service. So although it was rare, although the devotees would not interrupt Srila Prabhupada when he was speaking, out of exasperation, one of the female disciples stopped this person because he kept repeating himself, "What about my mind? What about my mind? Just do what he says, just try it." And then Prabhupada started the kirtan. One evening, a boy burst into a lecture, exclaiming that a riot was gathering on Haight Street. The Swami should come immediately, address the crowd, and calm everyone down. Mukunda explained that it wasn't necessary for Swamiji to go. Others could help. The boy just stared at Prabhupada, as if giving an ultimatum. Unless Swamiji came immediately, there would be a riot, and Swamiji would be to blame. Prabhupada spoke as if preparing to do what the boy wanted. Yes, I am prepared. But nobody went, and there was no riot. Usually during the kirtan, at least one dancer would carry on in a narcissistic, egoistic way, occasionally becoming lewd to the point where Prabhupada would ask the person to stop. Because Prabhupada taught his disciples about the Swami step. Swami step is the way Lord Chaitanya dances. One foot over then the other foot and the arms up, praying to the Supreme Lord. But the newcomers, they didn't know about the Swami step. And out of some initial ecstatic experience, having some relief of the mental tensions and the anxieties by chanting Hare Krishna, they would start to dance wildly. Even to the point where Prabhupada himself would have to ask the person to stop their wild chanting. One evening, before Srila Prabhupada had come down from his apartment, a girl in a miniskirt began writhing and gyrating in the temple during kirtan. When one of the devotees went upstairs and told Prabhupada, he replied, "That's all right. Let her use her energy for Krishna. I'm coming soon, and I will see for myself." So Prabhupada was used to it. He didn't like to admonish people and force them. He let things go peacefully to the point where if it caused a huge disturbance, then he would stop them. So he said to the devotee, who was concerned because the girl was dancing improperly in a miniskirt, Prabhupada said, "Let her use her energy, and I'll see when I come down." When Prabhupada arrived and started another kirtan, the girl, who was very skinny, again began to wriggle and gyrate. Prabhupada opened his eyes and saw her. He frowned and glanced at some of his disciples, indicating his displeasure. So this girl was creating a disturbance, and Prabhupada wanted the devotees to do something about it. Taking the girl aside, one of the women escorted her out. A few minutes later, the girl returned, wearing slacks, she had put on pants by that time, and dancing in a more reserved style. So really, Srila Prabhupada had to treat all of these young kids just like children. He had to discipline them, he had to correct them, and he had to do it very carefully because they were just like two-legged animals. You saw what some of these people looked like. And you didn't want to disturb such people. You didn't know what they would do. Prabhupada was sitting on his dais, that means his asan, lecturing to a full house, when a fat girl who had been sitting on the window seat suddenly stood up and began hollering at him. "Are you just going to sit there?" she yelled. "What are you going to do now? Come on, aren't you going to say something? What are you going to do? Who are you?" Her action was so sudden that Srila Prabhupada was in the middle of a lecture, you can imagine. And her speech was so violent that no one in the temple responded. Unangered, Prabhupada sat very quietly. He appeared hurt. Only the devotees sitting closest to him heard him say softly, as if to himself, "It is the darkest of darkness." So Srila Prabhupada had intense compassion for all of these people. Here he was lecturing, trying to spoon feed these young men and women the philosophy of Krishna consciousness. And some of them were so out of control, mentally unstable, they could not even hear. And they actually tried to attack Prabhupada in this way. What are you going to do? Who are you? Imagine. And Srila Prabhupada just had to tolerate. Another night, while Prabhupada was lecturing, a boy came up and sat on the dais beside him. The boy faced out toward the audience and interrupted Prabhupada. "I would like to say something now," the boy said. Prabhupada politely said, "Wait until after the class, then we have questions." The boy waited for a few minutes, still sitting on the dais, and Prabhupada continued to lecture. But again the boy interrupted. "I got something to say. I want to say what I have to say now." So these people were completely disrespectful, out of control. Imagine someone sitting and giving a lecture, Srila Prabhupada sitting and giving a lecture, and someone coming and sitting right next to him demanding to speak. No sense of respect whatsoever. The devotees in the audience looked up astonished, thinking that Swamiji would handle the matter and not wanting to cause a disturbance. None of them did anything. They simply sat while the boy began talking incoherently. Then Prabhupada picked up his kartals. "All right, let us have kirtan." The boy sat in the same place throughout the kirtan, looking crazily, sometimes menacingly, at Prabhupada. After half an hour, the kirtan stopped. Now, for those of you who have been following the Prabhupada Lilamrita, you'll remember one personality in New York temple, Brahmananda. So when things like this happened in New York, Prabhupada would just have one look at Brahmananda. Brahmananda was like I don't know how many kilos he was, but nobody messed with Brahmananda. So they had they didn't even have to speak. Prabhupada would just look at Brahmananda, and Brahmananda knew what to do. And he just picked the guy up and carry him out of the temple. But see, before Prabhupada left New York to come to San Francisco, Prabhupada had made Brahmananda the temple president in New York. So he wasn't able to come to San Francisco. And there was nobody of the stature of Brahmananda in San Francisco. It was just all these skinny, hungry hippies. So Prabhupada himself had to take care of his. Just wait till you see what Prabhupada did. Prabhupada cut an apple into small pieces. That was what Prabhupada would do after his lectures. He'd cut the apple, pass out the apple pieces, as was his custom. He then placed the paring knife, that's just a little knife that used to cut an apple, and a piece of apple in his right hand, and held his hand out to the boy. So he had the knife and the apple in his hand, in his right hand, and he held the hand out to the boy. The boy looked at Prabhupada, then down at the apple and knife. The room became silent. Prabhupada sat motionless, smiling slightly at the boy. After a long, tense moment, the boy reached out. A sigh rose from the audience as the boy chose the piece of apple from Prabhupada's open hand. So this is like taming a wild animal, really. And Prabhupada just had to tolerate it because this is what his spiritual master had sent him to America for, to make these mlecha, yavanas, subhumans into devotees. And he was successful. We're all sitting here now as a result. Haridas. Haridas, you remember Haridas was the one who painted the original picture there of the Panchatattva. Haridas was the one who gave Prabhupada his loft in the Bowery. And then Haridas went to live in California. Prabhupada made him the temple president there in San Francisco. So Haridas was with Prabhupada both in New York and San Francisco. So he's remembering. I used to watch how Swamiji would handle things. It wasn't easy. To me, that was a real test of his powers and understanding. How to handle these people, not to alienate or antagonize or stir them up to create more trouble. He would turn their energy so that before they knew it, they were calm, like when you pat a baby and it stops crying. Swamiji had a way of doing that with words, with the intonation of his voice, with his patience to let them carry on for a certain period of time, let them work it out, act it out even. I guess he realized that the devotees just couldn't say, listen, when you come to the temple, you can't behave this way. It was a delicate situation there. So Srila Prabhupada personally had to take care of the disciplinary correction of all of these people who would come and misbehave at the temple, because the devotees were so young, they didn't yet understand how they could take that responsibility from Prabhupada and correct the people themselves. They were watching how Prabhupada did it, and that way they learned how to do it in the future. Often someone would say, I am God. They would get an insight or hallucination from their drugs. They would try to steal the spotlight. They wanted to be heard, and you could feel an anger against the Swami from the people like that. That's because Srila Prabhupada is teaching all of us, you're the servant of God. But due to the drugs that they were taking and their so-called mystical experiences, they began to think that they were actually God. So Prabhupada was an impediment for them, because Prabhupada was trying to teach us that we weren't God, we're the servants of God. Sometimes they would speak inspired and poetic for a while, but they couldn't sustain it, and their speech would become gibberish. And the Swami was not one to simply pacify people. He wasn't going to coddle them. He would say, what do you mean? If you are God, then you have to be all-knowing. You have to have the attributes of God. Are you omniscient and omnipotent? So Prabhupada would challenge these poor misguided people who thought that they were God. Do you have the attributes of God? Do you know everything? Do you have all the powers of God? He would then name all the characteristics that one would have to be an avatar, to be God. So who knows what those 6 characteristics are? Who can say? Yes.
Strength,
Yes.
knowledge,
Yes.
beauty,
Beauty.
fame,
Fame.
renunciation.
Renunciation. Excellent. Right. So who has all of those things in fullness? No one but Krishna. He would rationally prove the person wrong. He had superior knowledge, and he would rationally explain to them, if you are God, can you do this? Do you have this power? Sometimes people would take it as a challenge and would try to have a verbal battle with the Swami. The audience's attention would then swing to the disturbing individual, the person who was grabbing the spotlight. Sometimes it was very difficult. This is Haridas still speaking. I used to sit there and wonder, how is he going to handle this guy? This one is really a problem. But Swamiji was hard to defeat. Even if he couldn't convince the person, now this is the way Prabhupada learned from his college, in his debating classes. It's also it's a Vedic art to be able to debate and defeat. So this is what he would do. Even if he couldn't convince the person, he convinced the other people in the crowd so that the energy of the room would change and would tend to quiet the person. Right? Because even if the person wanted to quarrel, everyone else in the room was listening, and they agreed with what Prabhupada said. So that would cause the person to quiet down. So Swamiji would move the audience rather than remove the person. Move the audience rather than remove the person. So Prabhupada did not overreact. By this time he was used to being challenged. Almost every night, they said. So he wouldn't say, "Get out of here." No. He would speak very rationally, and he would win over the whole audience. So then the person would lose their strength because nobody agreed with him. Move the audience instead of removing the person. So Swamiji would remove the audience rather than the person. So he would remove the audience from that person, and that way the person lost their power. He would do it without crushing the person. He would do it by superior intelligence, but also with a lot of compassion. When I saw him do these things, then I realized he was a great teacher and a great human being. He had the sensitivity not to injure a person physically or emotionally, so that when the person sat down and shut up, he wouldn't be doing it in defeat or anger. He wouldn't be hurt. He would just be outwitted by the Swami. This is a great art that we have to learn in our attempts to help others. Rather than trying to defeat a person and crush a person down, you outwit them with superior intelligence so that they can sit down and realize they've been defeated, but they haven't been crushed by us, right? Even while translating in the privacy of his room, Srila Prabhupada was interrupted by disturbances. Once police cars and ambulances, sirens screaming, lights flashing, converged beneath his window after the Hells Angels had started a fight in the digger's store in the next building. Okay, so Hells Angels, they are a motorcycle gang, and they ride these big Harley-Davidson motorcycles, twice the size of, what do you have here? Enfield, right? Enfield, Royal Enfield. Twice the size of that. And they would wear leather jackets, and they have their girlfriends on the back, and engage in all types of illicit activities. So right next to the temple was where the diggers were. The diggers were, they would serve out free food to people. So they had a fight in the middle of the night while Prabhupada was translating, and it was a major fight. It was such a big fight that the ambulances and the police cars had to come to break them up. So even when Prabhupada, he would wait till all the disciples went to sleep, everything was peaceful and quiet, then he would start his translating at about 1 o'clock in the morning, translate till 4 o'clock in the morning. Even then, he would get disturbed by what was going on outside of his window. Not only outside of his window, wait till you hear this one. On another occasion, about 1:30 a.m., while Prabhupada was dictating teachings of Lord Chaitanya, a girl repeatedly knocked and called at Prabhupada's door. At first, he ignored the interruption. Since his arrival in San Francisco, he had completed many pages for this important book. Lord Chaitanya's discussions with Rupa Goswami and Sanatana Goswami, Ramananda Roy, and others explored many Krishna-conscious topics mentioned only briefly in Bhagavad Gita. So Prabhupada, he had started his lectures on the teachings of Lord Chaitanya. He was translating the discourse between Lord Chaitanya and Sanatana Goswami in the form of lectures at the 26 2nd Avenue Temple. So when Prabhupada went to San Francisco, he continued these lectures, and these lectures were taped and then transcribed and made into a very important book that we still have called The Teachings of Lord Chaitanya. And that book is very, very important. How many of you have read The Teachings of Lord Chaitanya? Wonderful. In the early days, like now, just after Prabhupada started printing his books, we would read 5 books every day. We would read the Bhagavad Gita, the Srimad Bhagavatam, the Krishna book, Ishopanishad, Nectar Devotion, 6 books, Nectar Devotion, and the Teachings of Lord Chaitanya. So we would have so many classes during the day as Prabhupada printed more and more books. And that way, the more you hear, the more you're able to speak and help others. So it's very important that you spend time in the day reading Srila Prabhupada's major books, the Srimad Bhagavatam, Bhagavad Gita, Nectar Devotion, Krishna book, Ishopanishad, Teachings of Lord Chaitanya, and that's 6 right there. These core books that Prabhupada gave us in the very beginning, they will make you very strong in Krishna consciousness so that you can do what Srila Prabhupada is doing, trying to help people become Krishna conscious. In the West, almost no one knew about these teachings of Lord Chaitanya. And now Srila Prabhupada intended to compile these teachings in one volume, providing the most complete presentation of Bhakti Yoga ever introduced in English. Such a book would give great substance to the Krishna consciousness movement. But now his solitary concentration was being interrupted by a knocking at his door and a woman's voice calling. She wouldn't leave. She just kept knocking and calling at the door. 1:30 in the morning. Getting up from his desk, Prabhupada went to the front room, but did not open the door. "Who is there?" A young woman answered, "I want to speak to you." "Come back later in the morning," Prabhupada told her. He knew that in San Francisco, just as in New York, he would not always be able to write peacefully. Preaching in America meant having to tolerate just this, a crazy call in the middle of the night, tearing one away from ecstatic concentration on the pastimes of Lord Chaitanya. All right, so you're all going to have to come next week and hear what happens with the young girl at the door. All glories to Srila Prabhupada. Hare Krishna. Jai.